Only on a flight to Singapore would I never fly. A veteran Air France captain once remarked that Singaporeans are overly concerned with human connection, not decisive enough in their actions, always using polite pleasantries to mask their true intentions. He once held such prejudices. However, when he was assigned to the Changi route and had to visit Singapore, his values were profoundly shaken. What surprised him was not merely the technical excellence. The image of a maintenance worker he encountered on the tarmac late at night, and a single sentence uttered by that man, deeply moved his heart. What exactly happened? After reading this story, you too will wish to cleanse your conscience in a corner unseen by anyone. Please read to the very end. The morning at Charles de Gaulle Airport, Paris, was always enveloped in a bustling atmosphere. Amidst the faint, misty dampness on the roads, Air France pilots gradually gathered in the briefing room. It was a morning where only the scent of coffee and the echo of footsteps resonated. Yet, on this particular day, the atmosphere felt more tense than usual. Jean Dubois was a 5-year-old senior captain with 18 years of service. He had a refined face and the ability to make calm judgments in any adverse weather conditions. His colleagues had complete confidence in him. The flights he managed were always perfect, efficient, and most importantly, precise as a machine. This was his piloting philosophy. His father, a former French Air Force pilot, had taught him from a young age that piloting was about perfectly controlling a machine without the need for emotion. He grew up in his father's shadow, firmly adhering to this teaching. Although he lived a peaceful weekend life with his wife, Sophie, and their 2 children, at work, he allowed no compromises whatsoever. This was Jean. Antoine, the head of operations, stepped onto the podium, ready to announce the flight plan. Names of routes like New York, Singapore, along with the names of the responsible captains, were read out one by one. Jean looked down at his schedule, making notes indifferently. This was supposed to be an unremarkable briefing. Next, the Singapore flight, the inaugural flight on March 15th. Antoine swallowed hard for a moment. The room fell silent briefly. I would like Captain Jean to take responsibility. At that instant, the air in the room seemed to freeze. All eyes around the room simultaneously turned towards Jean. It was not a glance of blessing, but an expression of sympathy beyond words. Mark, sitting next to him, drew a quiet breath. An awkward silence lasted a few seconds. Poor soul. Someone's whisper was clearly audible in the silence. Jean felt bewildered. Why did everyone have such strange expressions? Was it a dangerous route? Or was there some special problem? He completely failed to grasp the reactions around him. It was too abnormal. After the meeting, Jean caught up with Senior Captain Antoine. Antoine, 55 years old, had flown for over 30 years. He must know something? Antoine, may I bother you for a moment? Jean called out. Antoine stopped, then slowly turned around. His expression conveyed a weariness, as if he had already anticipated this. He sighed deeply, looking at Jean. You want to ask about Singapore, don't you? Antoine preempted, his tone as if he had answered the same question countless times. Yes. Why is everyone so reluctant? Is there a problem? Antoine walked to the corridor window, looking out. On the runway, planes were taking off one after another. Engine sounds carried from afar. After a moment of silence, Antoine quietly began to speak. Jean, you don't know yet. The Changi flight is unlike any other route. Different how? More turbulence? Or is air traffic control difficult? Antoine shook his head. It's not a technical problem at all. One could even say it's the most friendly, most people-oriented route in terms of control. But in a certain sense, it's very dangerous. Jean frowned at the contradictory words, friendly but dangerous. What did this mean? Antoine's expression held an inexpressible complexity. Words cannot explain it. I can only tell you one thing. Once someone has flown the Changi route, either they cannot adapt to that atmosphere, or... He showed a meaningful expression. Or they will want to go back countless times. What do you mean? I know you might not believe it, but the Singapore route will change something in our hearts. That's the scary part, Antoine said, looking out the window. I don't know which type you'll become, but some changes are sure to happen. Only this much is certain. Those words strangely lingered in Jean's heart. Change something? What exactly did that mean? Not technical, not control. It was some factor Jean couldn't imagine. That night, at home, he opened his computer and began searching for information about Singapore. Changi Airport reviews, Singapore air traffic control, characteristics of Singaporeans. A series of keywords appeared on the screen: efficient, convenient, hospitable, strong community, spirit, pragmatic. Yet, in Jean's heart, another emotion arose. From the living room, he heard his wife, Sophie, clearing the dinner table. Jean looked at the screen and sighed softly. "Sophie, are you free? What is it? What's wrong?" Sophie poked her head out from the kitchen. "Next month, I'm going to Singapore." "Oh, isn't that good? I hear Singapore is a vibrant place, and the food is famous too." Jean showed a slightly bitter expression. "To be honest, I don't really want to go. Singaporeans are too concerned with rules and regulations, not flexible enough in their actions. Everything is about procedure and order. That kind of excessive formality, to me, feels unprofessional." Sophie was a little surprised but said nothing. Jean continued, "I hear they prioritize rules above personal discretion. Don't you think that's an enemy of efficiency? It would be better if they could think more flexibly, like us French." "But being human isn't a bad thing, is it?" Sophie gently said. "Warmth and unprofessionalism are two different things." Jean stared at the screen and replied, "Mixing emotions with work only blurs the lines. That's the culture I'm not used to." For Jean, Singapore was a difficult country to comprehend. Why such strict adherence to rules? Why prioritize absolute logic and efficiency over nuanced human interactions? To Jean, who grew up under French rationalism, this structured, rule-bound approach seemed like a lack of adaptability. As the departure date approached, the feeling of why in his heart grew stronger. His colleagues' strange reactions, Antoine's cryptic words, and his own prejudices against Singapore. All these intertwined, creating an incredible sense of unease. On the morning of departure, Jean tidied his uniform in front of the mirror. Spotless badges, neatly combed hair. This was his usual self. Looking at himself in the mirror, Jean took a deep breath. "Just fly as usual," he told himself. Heading to the airport, before boarding, co-pilot Mark approached with a tense expression. Mark, around 35 years old, was an excellent co-pilot and a trusted partner with whom Jean had flown many times. "Captain, ready to go?" Mark said, his voice laced with a faint tension. "It's all right, Mark. Just do as usual," Jean calmly replied, but he noticed his own voice was also a little stiff. The flight proceeded smoothly, over Western Europe, through the Middle East, then the Asian continent. During the long flight, Jean repeatedly thought about Singapore. What would he see in that island nation? And what was the change Antoine spoke of? Finally, they entered the Singapore Flight Information Region. At that moment, Jean felt the initial sense of perplexity. It wasn't a technical issue, but something inexplicable, like the air itself. Air France 316. "This is Singapore Approach Control. Good afternoon. Please maintain altitude 12,000 feet. The controller's voice was surprisingly clear and concise. But what was most striking was the tone of that voice. Neither mechanical nor overly casual, it was like a familiar old neighbor speaking to you. There was an incredible sense of reassurance. This was clearly different from control in other countries. "Received maintain 12,000 feet. Air France 316, Jean replied. Then, instructions to other aircraft followed. Singapore Airlines, Scoot, Jetstar Asia. Surprisingly, all aircraft were guided with perfect synchronicity. It wasn't rigid command and obedience, but rather a tacit understanding of mutual cooperation. All aircraft flowed through the air smoothly and without waste. Never experienced such control, Jean thought. He listened to the instructions flowing from the radio to other aircraft. Each instruction was concise but full of thoughtfulness. There was absolutely no hurried tone. Yet, the overall flow was surprisingly smooth. Efficiency and human consideration coexisted. Something Jean had considered impossible until now was happening here as a matter of course. Air France 316. Turn right to heading 230, 80 kilometers from Changi Airport. Received, turn right to heading 230. Jean and co-pilot Mark exchanged glances. Mark's expression also showed surprise. Do you feel it? Jean whispered. With this much traffic, to have such smooth control? It's incredible, Captain. It's almost as if everyone is one family, working in perfect sync, Mark replied. It feels like all the aircraft are looking out for each other. That description was very apt. Not chaos, but harmony. Not competition, but mutual support. The entire sky seemed to operate like a big family. Commencing the final approach to Changi Airport. Usually, this was the most tense moment. But the controller's voice held an incredible sense of calm. No anxiety, no frustration, and no mechanical coldness. Only quiet confidence and consideration for the other party. Air France 316, cleared for final approach. Runway 051, wind northeast. Welcome to Singapore, cleared to land. Received. Runway 051, cleared to land, Air France, 316. The aircraft touched the runway smoothly. A perfect landing. The moment the tires touched the ground, Jean was enveloped by a strange feeling. Technically, it should have been no different from other airports. So why did it feel so comfortable? There was an incredible sense of familiarity, as if he had returned home. Even after switching to ground control, the feeling remained the same. Taxiways and apron. Everything was efficient, yet never made one feel rushed. In every instruction, one could feel a concern for the aircraft. Air France, 316. Please proceed to base C6. Thank you for your hard work. That last phrase astonished Jean. Thank you for your hard work. The warmth of human feeling permeated a business communication. This was not merely a social pleasantry, but an expression of genuine appreciation for effort. The aircraft arrived at the parking bay, engines shut down. Jean took off his headset and looked out the window. Ground guidance personnel were already in position. Seeing their movements, Jean gasped. So coordinated. Every movement was fluid and natural, without any excess. But it wasn't a robotic uniformity. It was full of human vitality. Each person's movements had intent, thoughtfulness, and confidence. Mark, look outside, Jean said. What is it? The movements of those ground guides are so fluid, like old friends who have worked together for many years. Mark also looked out the window and let out a soft breath. You're right. And everyone looks so energetic, not tired at all. Precisely. Not rushed, not delayed. Everything happens at the opportune moment, at the opportune rhythm. Is this how Singaporeans work? A small question arose in Jean's heart. After disembarking, the ground staff did not perform exaggerated bows, but instead gave sincere nods of acknowledgement and bright smiles. That natural interaction made Jean stop. He didn't know why, but he could feel a heartfelt welcome contained within it. Without any hierarchical barriers. Welcome to Singapore. Thank you for your hard work, the staff member said in fluent English, eyes full of sincerity. Thank you, Jean replied. He was surprised to find that his own words also contained an unprecedented warmth. Entering the airport terminal, there too was a pleasant surprise. Clean, bright, and the vibrant movements of people. No one was rushing, yet no one was late. Everything flowed with precise and efficient energy. The air was filled with a faint hum of activity and friendliness. The next day, Jean had the opportunity to visit Changi Airport's Operations Control Center. This was part of an exchange program between Air France and Singapore Airlines. As soon as he entered the control center, Jean was stunned. Huge screens displayed countless aircraft. Air traffic controllers watched multiple screens, guiding planes as if ushering them home. However, what left the deepest impression was their expressions. There was tension, but no anxiety. Focus, but also composure. Occasionally, colleagues exchanged understanding glances. A senior controller approached him. A man in his late 50s, with a kind demeanor. Captain Dubois, welcome. Yesterday's landing was very smooth. Everyone was impressed. Thank you. Your guidance was also excellent, Jean replied sincerely. The controller smiled gently, as if entertaining a guest. We pursue efficiency so that every passenger can return home safely. It is our responsibility to create a sky where pilots can fly with peace of mind. Those words pierced his heart. Not efficiency for efficiency's sake, but for a safe return home. There was a huge difference there. Jean had always thought of efficiency as mechanical speed, but this controller spoke differently. Was there really such a thing, rooted in the importance of family and life? May I ask a question? Jean said, Please do. Why is your control so smooth? Even during busy times, there's no anxiety, and everything coordinates so well. The controller pondered for a moment and replied, Anxiety doesn't improve the situation. On the contrary, it spoils the atmosphere. So we are accustomed to being considerate of each other. This is not about suppressing emotions, but about using them wisely. What is that? It's hardware, the controller said sincerely. Pilots are tired after long flights. If we issue anxious instructions, it will add to their stress. So, we think from their perspective. What tone of voice will be reassuring? What approach will help each other? It's not just about technical skill. It's about connecting with heart. Jean was speechless. Was this the Singaporean attitude towards work? Behind the technology, there truly was a warm heart. As he left the control center, Jean looked back. The controllers were diligently continuing their work, occasionally exchanging brief reminders. The atmosphere was both professional and filled with human warmth. That afternoon, Jean reflected alone in his hotel room. Outside the window, the bustling cityscape of Singapore revealed itself, with modern skyscrapers interspersed with the vibrant colors of shophouses and temples. This was a city where traditional beliefs and modern life blended naturally. Mark knocked on the door and entered the room. "Captain, can we talk?" Please come in." Mark sat on a chair. "Captain, what do you think of Singapore?" Jean thought for a moment and replied, "To be honest, I'm confused. Before coming, I thought this was a place that only emphasized rules and lacked flexibility. But after actually coming here, I feel it's a bit different. They do emphasize order, but it's not just superficial. I feel a genuine sincerity." "I feel that way too," Mark said. "The smiles of the ground guides, the tone of the controllers, the way airport staff interact, all of it has an indescribable friendliness." "Yes," Jean looked out the window. "I feel I'm beginning to understand what Antoine meant." The two fell silent for a while. But it wasn't an awkward silence. It was a peaceful quietness shared through a mutual understanding. That night, Jean couldn't sleep. It wasn't just due to jet lag. The controller's words kept echoing in his mind, for a safe return home, putting oneself in others' shoes, connecting with heart. These words deeply stirred Jean's soul. How was this different from the perfect control his father had taught him? His father had said that emotions were unnecessary. Perfect control of the machine was everything. Jean had lived his life believing this. But what he saw in Singapore was different. Within the technology, there truly was a heart. At 2 a.m, Jean left his hotel room. Since he couldn't sleep, he might as well go for a walk. The hotel was close to Changi Airport. With the night breeze blowing, Jean walked towards the airport. Even in the dead of night, the airport was quietly operating. This place lived 24 hours a day. After getting permission from security, Jean walked towards the apron. There, he witnessed a fateful scene. A maintenance worker was doing something underneath an aircraft. Only the light of a work lamp illuminated the darkness. Approaching, he saw the man meticulously inspecting a small scratch and recording it on a tablet. He was a man in his late 40s, wearing a work uniform, with a rag in his hand. "Even such a small scratch needs to be inspected?" Jean asked. The maintenance worker looked up, showing a surprised expression. Immediately, he wiped his hands with a towel hanging around his neck and smiled ingenuously. "Yes, though it's small, my heart wouldn't be at ease if I didn't check," he replied politely. Although his English had a slight Singaporean accent, he spoke clearly. "Because every passenger is someone's family. Everyone has to go home safe, right?" That sentence and the sincerity in his eyes left Jean speechless. It was late at night, with no one watching, yet he wasn't slacking off. Precisely because no one was watching, he was even more true to his conscience. That attitude touched Jean's heart. "How many years have you been in this line of work?" Jean asked. 20 years, the maintenance worker smiled a little shyly. "Every day I do the same thing, but as long as I think that everyone can leave safely and return home happily, I dare not be careless." Return home safely. This phrase deeply resonated. For Jean, work was a task to be completed. Perfect, efficient, accurate. But for this man, work was guardianship, a promise to strangers. "Excuse me, are you a captain?" the maintenance worker asked. "Yes, I am a captain from Air France." The maintenance worker nodded kindly, extending his rough hand. "Thank you for bringing everyone here safely. We, who work behind the scenes, admire you who fly in the sky the most." Jean grasped those hands, feeling his chest swell. This man was proud of his work, but it was not an arrogant pride. It stemmed from a sense of responsibility and goodwill. "It is I who should thank you. Because of your conscience, we can fly with peace of mind," Jean said from the heart. The two chatted for a while. The maintenance worker, Mr. Tan, had a high school daughter who also wanted to work in aviation in the future. Mr. Tan said he taught his daughter the importance of this job, to always act with a clear conscience. Even if no one sees, God sees, and our own heart sees. That's the foundation of being human, Mr. Tan explained. This sentence deeply etched itself into Jean's heart. Even if no one sees, our conscience sees. This might be the Singaporean attitude towards work. Walking on the apron, other maintenance personnel were also quietly working. No one was rushing, but no one was slacking either. Everyone occasionally called out to each other. The atmosphere was harmonious. Some maintenance workers were wiping aircraft windows, Some were checking tires. Each person was diligently performing their duties at their respective posts. Jean stopped and gazed at this scene. This might be true perfection. Not cold precision, but warm meticulousness. Behind the technology, there truly was a human heart. Is this what Antoine called dangerous? Jean muttered to himself. The perfection he had always believed in was mechanical precision, devoid of emotion, seeking only efficiency. That was the piloting philosophy his father had taught. But the perfection existing here was different. It was perfection born from thinking of others, filled with human consideration. He realized this difference. And once he realized it, he could not go back. This was probably what Antoine meant by danger. Values would be changed. Discovering that what he had always believed to be correct was actually incomplete. This kind of impact was truly shocking. On his way back to the hotel, Jean looked up at Singapore's night view. Countless lights illuminated the darkness. Behind each light, there were people's lives. And each of them, perhaps like Mr. Tan, lived earnestly. The next day, something unexpected happened during the preparations for the return flight. It was reported that there was an error in the aircraft catering arrangements. The quantity was insufficient. Usually, this would be a situation that would provoke anger. Departure might be delayed, causing inconvenience to passengers. But the response of the Singaporean staff was different. The person in charge immediately arrived, his face showing sincere apology, and with clasped hands, he bowed deeply. This is truly our oversight. We are very sorry. Surprisingly, they did not wait for instructions, but displayed incredible flexibility. In just 15 minutes, they not only arranged for replacement catering, but also prepared some local Singaporean snacks as compensation. During this time, the staff did not shirk responsibility, but focused on how to resolve the problem as quickly and effectively as possible. What was even more astonishing was that before departure, the person in charge came to apologize again. He sincerely said, "I am very sorry for the inconvenience we caused. We have already coordinated everything and guarantee that there will be no delay in takeoff. I wish you a smooth and safe flight today." That attitude of treating the problem as their own and resolving it made Jean feel ashamed of his own arrogance. In France, people pride themselves on perfect mechanisms, but mechanisms sometimes fail. At that time, what matters most is human flexibility and sincerity. Singaporeans possess a heart that seeks completeness. Not rigid rules, but human consideration and sincerity are the key to solving problems. "Thank you," Jean said sincerely. "Your adaptability is truly strong." "This is really great." The person in charge showed a relieved smile. "Thank you, sir. As long as it didn't delay everyone, it's fine." This small incident became the decisive starting point for changing Jean's inner direction. No one is perfect, mistakes happen, but how one faces mistakes, that's where humanity is revealed. Sitting in the cockpit, Jean took a deep breath. Mark sat beside him, confirming the pre-departure checklist. Jean looked out the window. The ground guides were waving vigorously, their faces beaming with smiles. He understood that every gesture was imbued with sincerity. The friendly voice of the controller came through, a voice that contained consideration for the other party. The maintenance personnel were performing their final checks, carefully confirming unseen parts. Everything was for people, for the next passenger. Even in places unseen by anyone, they put in their best effort. Jean understood. This was Singapore. "Mark," Jean said. "Yes, Captain. This place is truly warm, isn't it?" Mark showed a slightly surprised expression. "It's rare for the captain to say that." "Ah," Jean smiled. "Before coming, I misunderstood, but after seeing, experiencing, and talking, I finally understood. It's not just superficial. There's a genuine human touch here." Air France 316. "Please confirm readiness for takeoff." The controller's voice came through. "Ready for takeoff." Air France 316. Jean replied. "Received. Runway 05 cleared for takeoff. Have a safe flight." That last phrase made Jean's chest warm. Have a safe flight. It wasn't just a standard phrase. It contained a heartfelt wish for their safety. "Received. Thank you." Jean's voice contained an unprecedented warmth. The aircraft slowly moved on the taxiway towards the runway. Jean looked at Changi Airport, illuminated by bright lights. The airport looked both busy and vibrant. Entering the runway, engines at full throttle, the aircraft accelerated and finally took to the sky. The cityscape of Singapore spread out below. Countless lights sparkled like a terrestrial galaxy. "Goodbye, Singapore," Jean murmured in his heart. "I will come again." The aircraft gained altitude, piercing through the clouds. A starry sky unfolded before him. Jean gripped the controls, enveloped by an incredible sense of fulfillment. Something had changed. It had truly changed. Not just technical skill, but also heart. Not just efficiency, but also warmth. The definition of perfection had fundamentally transformed. "Captain, are you thinking about something new?" Mark asked. "Ah," Jean replied. "I'm thinking about what I learned in Singapore. Technology is only complete when it's combined with a heart that thinks of others." "I had forgotten such a simple truth." Mark quietly nodded. "Me too. I've felt a lot these past few days." The two continued to pilot in silence, but that silence was filled with understanding and resonance. During the long flight, Jean repeatedly recalled what had happened in Singapore. The controller's friendly, almost neighborly voice. "Mr. Tan's earnest smile, the manager's flexible improvisation, the vibrant waves from the ground guides, everything connected, pointing to a single truth. Work is not just to be completed, but to be done with heart. Technology is not merely a skill, it coexists with human connection. Perfection is not cold, flawless precision, but springs from conscience and warmth. Once this truth is realized, one cannot return to being the person they once were." This was what Antoine called dangerous, but at the same time, it was the best gift. Upon returning to Paris, Jean's posture in the cockpit had changed. It was not a drastic change, but a quiet yet definite one. His conversations with co-pilot Mark became more courteous. His responses to air traffic control were filled with greater respect. The first to notice this was Mark himself. On one flight, Mark made a small error, inputting the wrong altitude setting. Although it was immediately corrected, in the past, he would surely have received a severe reprimand. But Jean calmly said, "It's all right, Mark. Everyone makes mistakes. The important thing is to notice and correct them immediately." Mark looked at Jean in surprise. The captain, who had always pursued perfection, actually spoke such gentle words. A few days later, due to bad weather, a go-around was necessary. Fog shrouded the airport. Visibility worsened. The first approach was abandoned, and the decision was made to hold in the air. In the past, he would have felt anxious. Now it was different. "Mark, no need to rush. The safety of all passengers is the top priority," Jean calmly assessed. "Everyone wants to go home safely. We'll patiently wait for the weather to improve." 30 minutes later, the weather improved. The second approach, a perfect landing. Applause erupted in the cabin. Passengers were delighted to have arrived safely. Mark exclaimed in surprise, "Captain, you've changed somehow, haven't you?" Jean smiled quietly. "I learned it in Singapore. Technology must be combined with a human touch to be complete." "In Singapore?" "Yes." Jean looked out the window. "The people in that place dedicate their hearts to their work. Even if no one sees, they don't cut corners. It's not just a formality. It's because they truly treat others as their own." Mark nodded silently. Jean's words contained a profound sense of lived experience. A few weeks later, a new schedule was distributed. Jean flipped through the pages, searching for something. His heart pounded a little faster. When he found it, he unconsciously smiled. Next month, there was also a Singapore flight scheduled. Jean picked up his pen and circled the words. He was no longer afraid. On the contrary, he wanted to immerse himself in that atmosphere of genuine human connection again, to meet those earnest people again. And this time, he too would fly with his heart, just like them. Mark, sitting next to him, let out a surprised sound. "Jean, Singapore again? Don't you need to refuse?" "No, I won't refuse," Jean quietly replied. "On the contrary, I want to go." Mark looked utterly incredulous, but Jean didn't mind. He softly wrote in the corner of the schedule, "To feel true warmth once more." That evening, Jean called his wife, Sophie. "Sophie, next month I'm going to Singapore again. How was it last time? Didn't you say it was a route nobody liked?" Jean chuckled slightly. "Initially, I was very confused, but Singapore is wonderful. The kindness, the meticulousness, the human connection of the people, everything is beautiful." "That's great then." Sophie's voice sounded happy too. "It's best if you're happy, but what makes it so special?" Jean thought for a moment and replied, "It's hard to explain in one sentence, but the people in that place don't treat work as a cold task, but as a responsibility towards people. Even if no one sees, they act with a clear conscience. That's a matter of course there." "That's amazing." "Yes." Jean looked out the window. "I also want to change. Not just technically, I want to fly with my heart, treating every passenger as family. After hanging up, Jean looked out the window. The Parisian sky was a little brighter than usual. He realized it wasn't the world that had changed, but his own eyes. He could now see things he couldn't see before. At work, Jean's transformation began to be the talk of the office. Passenger feedback ratings significantly improved. Recently, I heard that passengers are all praising Captain Dubois' excellent piloting, said Antoine, head of operations. Is there a secret? Jean thought for a moment and replied, I didn't do anything special. I just wanted to treat every passenger sincerely as a human being. That's the hardest part. Antoine laughed. But you did it naturally. That's truly wonderful. Hearing this, Jean thought of the Singaporeans. They didn't do anything special. They simply did what was supposed to be done meticulously and earnestly with thoughtfulness. And Jean understood that that supposed to be done was, in fact, the hardest thing to achieve. The second Singapore flight was approaching. One day before departure, Jean prepared at home, tidying his uniform, checking documents. But this time, he also prepared a small letter. It was a letter to Mr. Tan, the maintenance worker he had met late at night. In simple English, but he wrote with heartfelt sincerity, I was deeply moved by your attitude towards work. I also want to fly with a clear conscience like you. Upon arriving in Singapore for the second time, as the aircraft touched the runway, Jean was enveloped by an incredible feeling, a sense of security, like coming home. Although it was only his second visit, he felt a sense of nostalgia. Ground personnel guided the aircraft. Their movements were as fluid as before, but this time, he understood the meaning behind that fluidity. It wasn't mechanical precision, but a tacit understanding, driven by heart. After disembarking, Jean went to the maintenance area. He wanted to see Mr. Tan. Fortunately, he found him there, inspecting an aircraft. Mr. Tan, Jean called out. Mr. Tan looked up, surprised for a moment, then showed his ingenuous smile. Captain Dubois, you're here again? Yes, Jean held out the letter. This is a thank you letter for you. Mr. Tan took the letter, smiled a little shyly, and carefully put it in his pocket. Thank you, sir. You're too kind. Your words changed me, Jean said. Even if no one sees, our conscience sees. I will never forget that phrase for the rest of my life. Mr. Tan scratched his head, showing a simple expression. I'm just doing my part, but hearing you say that makes me very happy. The two chatted for a while. Mr. Tan mentioned that his daughter had started studying to become an aircraft maintenance technician. Seeing her father's footsteps, she must have understood the meaning of this work. When parting, Mr. Tan said, Captain Dubois, please do visit Singapore often. We always welcome you. These words warmed Jean's heart. Several months later, an incredible thing happened. The number of pilots volunteering for the Singapore route slowly began to increase. These were people who became interested after hearing Jean's story. The route, initially misunderstood, was now gradually becoming a popular one, and everyone who returned from a Singapore flight said the same thing. My way of looking at the world has changed. So, this is what human connection truly means. I want to go again. Jean smiled quietly. The seeds had been sown. From one person to two, from two people to four. Kindness spreads like this, doesn't it? What Antoine had called dangerous was, in fact, the best gift. One day, Jean found something dropped on the airport floor. It was a small wallet. In the past, he might have just walked past it. But now, it was different. He stopped and picked it up. A nearby cleaning staff member spoke to him. Thank you, Captain. You're such a kind person. No, Jean smiled. I just did what was supposed to be done. What was supposed to be done? The meaning of this phrase, which he had learned in Singapore, he now understood. It wasn't anything special. It was simply doing what was right according to one's conscience. That's all. But that's all was, in fact, the most important thing. One winter day, Jean and his family gathered around the dinner table. His wife, Sophie, his 1 5-year-old son, and his 1 2-year-old daughter. A warm dinner table. Dad has become much gentler lately, his daughter said. Jean laughed. Was I scarier before? Getting angry at anything imperfect. His son. Sophie smiled and said, Ever since you went to Singapore, you've changed, my dear. Ah, Jean nodded. I learned something important. More than perfection, sincerity matters more. What do you mean? His daughter asked. Jean thought for a moment and replied, For example, this meal. Mama's cooking may not be the most gourmet in the world, although it's delicious. But the heart Mama put into it, thinking of her family, That feeling is more important than anything. Sophie's eyes softened. Thank you. It is I who should thank you. Jean held his wife's hand. Always, thank you. The children smiled shyly, but those smiles were warm and happy. The sky seen from the cockpit became more beautiful than before, because he could see beyond just the technical, the shapes of the clouds, the light, the sound of the wind. All felt more vivid than before. Mark said one day, "Captain, your piloting lately is truly like an art." Art? Jean laughed. Not that exaggerated. It's just using my heart. But that's the hardest part, Mark said. I want to be a person like you, Captain. You are already a good enough pilot, Jean said. I just hope you remember one thing. Technique is important, but technique alone is not enough. It must be combined with human consideration to be complete. Mark nodded seriously, his eyes gleaming with understanding. Antoine called Jean aside one day. In the head of operations office, the two spoke alone. Jean, you've truly changed, Antoine said. Yes, Jean frankly admitted. The Singapore flight changed me. Actually, I also flew the Singapore route before, Antoine said. Although that was 20 years ago. Is that so? Antoine's eyes gazed into the distance. The human connection I felt back then still lives in my heart to this day. That's why I gave you that route. I thought if it were you, you would definitely grasp something. Thank you, sir. Antoine smiled. You exceeded my expectations. And now you're influencing other pilots too. Nothing could make me happier. The two looked out the window. On the runway, planes were taking off one after another. In each aircraft, hundreds of lives existed. Pilots, passengers, maintenance workers, controllers, the hearts of all people converged into one. Jean now flew the Singapore route every month. Each time he went, he discovered something new. The beauty of Singapore, the kindness of its people, the sincerity in their work. These things never faded. On one Singapore flight, a passenger suddenly fell ill. Jean immediately assessed and decided to make an emergency landing at the nearest airport. Before, he might have been concerned about the schedule delay, but now it was different. Dear passengers, we apologize greatly. Due to a passenger's sudden illness, we will be making an emergency landing. For everyone's safety, please understand and cooperate. There was no sound of dissatisfaction in the cabin. Instead, there were sounds of concern. People understood. The emergency landing was successful. The ill passenger was safely transported to the hospital. After that, the flight resumed. Although it arrived in Singapore 3 hours later than scheduled, upon disembarking, passengers expressed their gratitude to Jean. Captain, thank you for your decision. You worked hard. It's good that everyone is safe. Jean politely nodded to each passenger. This was a heartfelt interaction he had learned in Singapore. What is professionalism? Jean now knew the answer. It was not just perfect technical skill, but skill that coexisted with a heart that thought of others. Honesty that adhered to conscience, even when no one saw. Meticulousness done with heart, not just formality. All these combined to form a true professional. Singapore had taught him the essence of work. It was not a task, but guardianship. Not an obligation, but conscience. And most importantly, it was the connection between people. Today, Jean was also flying in the sky. Gripping the controls, he thought about the lives of hundreds of people on this aircraft. I will treat each and every one of them as family, with heart, meticulously, and safely deliver them to their destination. This was Jean's new piloting philosophy. Not the perfect control he learned from his father, but the heartfelt piloting he learned in Singapore. When technique and heart converge as one, true perfection is born. Pilots who once feared the Singapore route were now flying it with pride. Because they knew that place would make them grow, transforming them from technicians into true professionals. Do you work with your heart? Even if no one sees, do you also put in your conscience? Not just a formality. Do you treat others with genuine human connection? Singapore's virtues are unseen, but they truly exist. They manifest in the form of flexibility, human consideration, and conscience. And they possess the power to transcend borders, to change human hearts. Please tell us your thoughts in the comments section. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.